Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. I'm Mr. 50mm, and in this video, we are going to be going over what I think is the final video of the DIY rangefinder project known as the RGM-79. Now, that is not to say that there will not be updates. There will be. There are still things that I have wanted to implement that I haven't done yet, and there are probably still fixes that need doing. However, these probably won't be bundled together in a big video anymore, rather possibly in smaller videos, or more probably just in the change logs of the hackaday.io project files. And again, I'll link to that in the description below if you want to build yourself one of these. And for today's video, I'm going to just really walk through the camera itself. I'm not going to call it a review because I think I'm a tiny bit biased. I mean, I did make this thing after all. For anyone who's jumping into this video series now at the tail end of it, I'll give you a brief introduction to it. Essentially, I have made myself a digital rangefinder. It is made by combining the rangefinder from a Soviet-era Fed 5 and combining that with a kind of modern Panasonic GF3. All of that is held together with a ton of 3D printing. With that, let's dive into it. Operation and feel. Before we get into this stuff though, I do want to say the version of the camera that I'm currently holding and the version that I'm most comfortable with is the first one in the series. This is the one with the front grip, a magnetic rear LCD and button cover, and it has a cold shoe. And like I said, this is the first one of 4. So there are 3 other configurations on the hackaday.io page. Now, let's have a look at it, shall we? You probably noticed, though, that this camera, it's a tiny bit thick. If you compare it to, say, the Leica M8, that is around 37 millimeters of thickness. Now, this camera, if you don't count my grippy bit, is 47 millimeters, which is more. Additionally, this camera is also taller than an M3, where the M3 is 80 millimeters. This is around 92 millimeters. The only saving grace for the RGM-79 is that overall it's a tiny bit narrower, where the M8 is 139 millimeters. This is 136 millimeters. Now, despite the size of the RGM-79, this camera actually comes in at a hair under 480 grams. That is 110 grams lighter than the Leica M8, probably owing to the entirely plastic build of the body. Bear in mind that if you make this camera, the weight of yours may be different based on how you decide to print the parts. I went for a pretty dense build, so I got a pretty heavy camera. Now, I may be a tiny bit biased, but I find my camera that I built is pretty solid to hold, especially considering that I have on this camera a rear thumb perch and a front camera grip. Now, I love me the Leica M series cameras, like this one here. Look at this. This is my M3. It's some pretty. But even though my naked M3 looks great, I never personally found these things to be that great to hold. Maybe that's just me though. Right. I can kind of feel that people may be sharpening pitchforks. Hear me out though. When I had my M8, I actually ended up buying the official tiny cylindrical front grip for it because I just couldn't get used to not having anything there to really hold onto. Probably from all the DSLR use. Damn you, good ergonomics. On top of that, I also had a bunch of friends who were M shooters, and along with myself and my friends, we all ended up buying the weird thumb clippy thing that goes on top of the hot shoe so that you can perch your thumb somewhere, since the back of the M8 is like the back of the M3 and it is flat. So it's not the nicest thing to hold. It's not bad. And with the, small Leica lenses, it's quite good, but with grips and thumb rests, it's better. Anyways, having integrated both the grips added some thickness. But again, for me, I think it is quite nice to hold, and it feels reasonable too, even though it is all plastic. And for me, I made it even a little nicer to feel, again, by adding a little bit of leatherette in some strategic places. Right here, so my fingies, and again on the back, where my thumb is perched. Additionally, as I mentioned before, this has the magnetic screen and button cover. And I did this because I wanted a more distraction-free experience, and I also wanted to prevent my hands and my face from randomly touching things. And as a result, I've got this magnetic cover dealie. And with the cover on, the shooting experience is more akin to an actual film rangefinder. And in a pinch, this can also act as a lens shade. Now, the magnets aren't actually strong enough to hold it up on its own, so you are required to perch your thumb like so and hold it up, but it works. Now, being a mirrorless camera at its base, it can be operated as such in the event that you feel like using lenses that are not coupled with the rangefinder. The rear LCD, again, is basically the live view that you're going to get from the GF3 if you didn't cut it up and put it in a new body. Using the OVF. Now, I did mention in a previous video that the optical finder is fairly Soviet, a tiny bit Spartan. Additionally, I realized recently from buying a different Fed 5 with a different rangefinder, the one that I just bought has projected frame lines, and it does not have the adjustable diopter. Turns out they did not combine both. Anyways, what I'm trying to get at here is that using the Fed 5 with the projected frame lines, I could see that the rangefinder patch in the finder is actually a little bit above the center of the frame on the Fed 5 with the projected frame lines. And this kind of explains some of the weirdness that I was experiencing shooting the RGM-79 using the diopter correction only rangefinder. So it's nice to know that the framing stuff that I had to get used to wasn't entirely my fault. I'm not particularly terrible at making things. Turns out I'm just not that great at selecting great things to make things from, if that makes sense. Let's discuss the top panel controls. As I previously mentioned on this camera, there are only really a couple controls on top plate, and I did omit one of them from the original GF3 control layout. You'll notice that there is no IA mode toggle button. Otherwise, it is the same as the GF3. I didn't really move the buttons from their spots on the PCB. I simply made the buttons a bit taller. And personally, I thought that this made the shutter location and the shutter button a little more comfortable for me, a little higher up in where it normally was. And again, I think that this is ergonomically a nice choice. So my hand just naturally kind of falls on it and I'm able to just rest my hand there. I admit I maybe could have styled them a tiny bit better. But here we are. I used squares as my design, and you know, squares, they're a good shape. The cold shoe. Now, this is an option I just kind of liked having because I like the look of the cold shoe on top of the camera. I'm not actually sure what I could put on here, so, you know, open to some ideas. When it comes to the digital side of the RGM-79, it is the GF3. So I'm not really going to go over all that stuff. I did a separate video reviewing the GF3, so if you want to get my opinion on that, have a look at that video. I will say though that the GF3 layout itself was specifically like very simple and allowed for me to make this conversion fairly easily. And using this camera is fairly nice because I just set the camera to aperture priority, set the ISO to auto, and really with that done, I don't really have to interface with the digital bits all that much. There are enough controls on the GF3 itself that I can handle most things on the touchscreen or using the actual buttons that are on there. Additionally, because this is a rangefinder camera, all the lenses have nice clicky apertures, and with the camera already in aperture priority with auto ISO, I can just get on with enjoying the camera, setting my aperture, taking the picture, and not fiddling around too much. I will say, again, with the more tactile controls of the aperture rings on the actual Leica and, you know, Leica thread mount lenses, I find that the overall experience of shooting this camera is generally nicer than actually shooting the GF3 as a regular Micro Four Thirds camera. I will admit there's one thing that is a tiny bit annoying: battery and SD card swaps. I'm a bit lazy and I didn't really design a proper battery door or SD card door. I made a cover, and the cover is this entire bottom plate that you see here. So in order to get at the battery or SD card, you have to unscrew the strap lugs and pull the cover off. Honestly, it kind of reminds me of actually, you know, removing the rangefinder base plate to load film. So in a way, it's more false immersion. And I think it's a little bit better than some of the false immersion that have been coming out recently, the Fuji X-Half, that thing. If you don't look at it that way, it's kind of a weird annoyance. I'll try to get it off now to show you. There we go. Another random fun fact about this particular design is that in order to remove the battery, you must first actually remove the SD card, because the SD card itself will block the battery tab. So that's fun. Right, so once the SD card is out, you simply pull this tab and the battery should pop down a little bit, and all you gotta do is give the camera a bit of percussion and the battery will slide right out. And to reinstall, shonk that in, shonk your card in, and redo the screws. One thing that is, I think, much nicer than, say, an actual budget digital rangefinder like the M8 or the Epson RD1 series is that the GF3 battery life is substantially less ass than those two aforementioned cameras. I do specifically remember the M8 on cold days with a fresh topped up battery would barely last more than, say, 75-ish shots. And on not freezing days, I actually don't remember getting much more than like 150 on a charge. So yeah, to be fair, that's not a high bar, but the GF3 batteries will go for around 300 CPA rated shots, and it'll actually do it. I think in theory, the M8 was also supposed to do around 300 CPA rated shots, but good luck with that. Shooting with the Micro Four Thirds crop. A pretty common question that I got was, why Micro Four Thirds? Why not something bigger? And isn't this crop unbearable? The short of the long is that after shooting with my lenses for a little while, I just grew kind of accustomed to the effective field of view that I had to deal with, and I just went along with it. The camera still gave me the shooting experience that I wanted, and for the long of the long, keep watching. For those of you who aren't aware, I did another project, the digital TLR project, and that was much more janky. This looks kind of like a nice product, maybe. But, you know, the GF3 was selected for this project partly because I'd already done a project with it, and I could use that as a basis to make the digital rangefinder and save some time on development. And honestly, I think it did save a couple weeks because it did take me a little while to work out the logistics of how to, you know, pull the GF3 parts out and to redo a bunch of the assemblies to make them fit inside the digital TLR. So again, when it came to the digital rangefinder project, it made sense for me to just use that as a basis and continue from there. The result of that was, since I was using work that I was already, I was using a camera that I already worked on, it only took me about 2 weeks to make a camera that functioned in theory, and it took me about 6 weeks to make the first body that you saw on one of the progress videos. I think there's a couple other things added on by the 6-week mark, but the general design was settled by that point. Now, I do admit a 2x crop isn't the greatest. I find myself using wider lenses to combat this, and I do admit that those lenses aren't that cheap. One of the ones that you may recognize me using was the 28mm f1.9 Ultron, and this one here, the Canon 35mm f1.8 in Leica thread mount. And if you get these focal lengths, it's not too bad. The 28 becomes a more standard 56mm-ish field of view, and the Canon becomes 70, which I like quite a lot. Now, this leads to another follow-on effect, and that is that you don't really tend to get that close to your subjects since the effective field of view is kind of long. And this kind of works out for me since, if you remember my last video, I had a hell of a time trying to figure out the close focus adjustment of my rangefinder. This is partly because the amount of shellac on the cams for the Fed 5 cameras that I bought is ridiculous, and I would need to use some sort of solvent to loosen and or break it off so I can actually do the close focus adjustment. So with these slightly longer field of views, I'm not getting that close. Another nice happenstance is that the Fed 5 finder is mostly made for 50mm, so the effective 56mm field of view feels pretty natural on this camera. That being said, I admit using the more conventional 50mm lenses is a bit tough. 100mm field of view to me is just a bit narrow. It is, however, close to like the 90mm that you would find on other rangefinders. So if you are actually someone who uses like an M3 or another rangefinder that does have 90mm frame lines and you do like that focal length, adjusting to this might not be too bad since the 90 and 100 are kind of close. That being said, for me personally, even on film, even though I have a 90mm Leica lens, I very seldom used it. But maybe I should give it a go. And, you know, for those who are interested in the like run and gun style shooting where you have like an ultra wide lens, you zone focus, stop down, and you just take the shot from the hip, that is going to be harder to do on this camera, since getting an ultra wide in Leica mounts is going to be a bit difficult. Plus, when you take into account that field of view, it's not going to be that ultra wide. So either you're going to have to become more patient or get a bit better at feeling out the narrower framing, or do more gunning and just shoot more. Conclusion. With this video, the project comes to a little bit of a close. Again, keep an eye out on the hackaday.io page for this project, link in the description below. There are going to be updates posted there periodically, but expect that I'm not going to be doing a lot of changes to this camera. I'm not going to be developing or making it at light speed anymore. Again, there'll be probably minor updates and changes added from time to time. Again, I'm still thinking of adding some more features in, like the idea for magnetically clipped in sensor filter glass. You can swap between IR or full spectrum or whatever. So yeah, there are still things for me to do, but the rate of development is going to slow a tiny bit. If anyone does decide to build one of these cameras, let me know how it goes. Let me know if there's things that I need to improve, whether or not that's the design of the camera or whether or not that's like the actual instructions that I did. I'm not an amazing technical writer, so if there are things that I need to specify or clarify, let me know. And if you do build one, let me know what lenses you're going to use with it. I just want to know out of curiosity. Otherwise, as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and maybe a super thanks if you're into that. Till next time, bye.